Good evening, everybody, and thank you for attending this hybrid meeting of the Governance Committee on Tuesday, 17th of November 2020. My name is Councillor Ian Watkinson, and I'm the chair of this committee. Councillor Colin Sharples is the vice chair. Also present with me are members of the committee, officers, and Councillor Paul Foster. We also have our external auditors dialing in on Microsoft Teams. Please note this is an audio and video meeting. It's been recorded and the stream will also be live on YouTube. The web address for this is displayed on the agenda for the meeting and can be found on the Council's website. Members are asked to keep their microphone on mute and only unmute when they wish to speak. Members and officers present in the Shield Room are also asked to ensure that they keep their microphone switched off unless they're speaking and to mute themselves afterwards in order to avoid any feedback. Only one microphone across both the Shield Room and Microsoft Teams can be activated at any one time. Reports will be presented by officers, after which I'll bring the report into committee. If any member of the committee wishes to speak on an item, you should indicate that you would like to speak. I will then invite you in order. After the committee has considered the reports, we will move on to the vote, as no representations have been received from members not on committee or members of the public. There we go. There's the preamble. So we'll crack off. And item number 1, apologies.
No apologies, Chair.
OK, thanks very much. Item number 2, declarations of interest. As this is a hybrid meeting, if a member has a pecuniary interest, they're requested to leave the meeting completely rather than just mute their microphone. The member can rejoin the meeting following the completion of the item in question. Does anyone have any interest to declare? No, very good. Moving on, item 3, minutes of the last meeting. I've got the minutes of the last meeting in front of me for approval. Do we have a seconder for those? OK, thank you very much. I'll sign those off. Any queries on those at all? No, nobody said anything. I don't think. I can't see. Right, I'll sign. OK. Oh, Councillor. OK, Councillor Turner first, please.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that on page 4, there's an action there on the auditors. Or it says resolved that about the Council External Auditors draft a letter containing key information and timescales relevant to the 2018-19 audit. Now, actually, at the meeting, I wrote down the action and I wrote down what Mr. Stocks said to us. I think it's Stocks, is it? The guy that's helping out the auditors, Mark Stocks. Who stated, I don't know, you look like you're smiling there, who stated that you would provide a letter with the key deliverables and a forecast date for the 18-19 audit report. So that minute there is inaccurate. It's not what was agreed. And I don't believe that deliverables being made either. Thanks, Chair.
So thanks, Councillor Turner. I'm just checking with the officers here on with the point that you've raised about challenging the accuracy of the minutes. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. I don't think the resolution of the committee changed. I think what you're suggesting is that there was a commitment given during the course of the meeting by the external auditors to provide some additional information.
Yeah, correct.
Right, so you're proposing to amend the minutes to include that text?
I think my concern is that we were promised that it wasn't being delivered. And the reason for that was that we were asking, we're still waiting for a forecast date for the 18-19 audit. So we were promised a plan that wasn't delivered. We were promised a letter and that's not been delivered. My understanding that's not been delivered. So if that means amending that paragraph there, because it doesn't reflect what we're doing, then yeah, okay.
I think, Councillor Turner, and it might be, we've got on the agenda tonight the statement, well, the statement of accounts for 1819 is an agenda item, and it perhaps would be appropriate for you to put that as a question to external audit at that point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for that. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, that was one of the points I was going to raise. We don't have an item on the agenda for matters arising, but there were resolutions at the last meeting which to my mind haven't been implemented. Another one is on page 6, which is the schedule for high-risk audits to be produced. I assume both of these items will be covered under the other items which are on the agenda. So if we can have confirmation of that, there's no need to discuss them at this point in time.
Thanks for that, Councillor Clark. I'm pretty sure they will be. Okay. I think that takes us on then to item 4, and we do have Mark Stocks with us this evening, and it might well be, Mark, that we cover items 4, 5 and 6 together, and that should become clear from what you have to talk to us about.
Mark, do you want me to start, Mark?
Yes, please, James.
Okay. Yeah, so you are correct. We are looking to cover all these 4, 5 and 6 in the same discussion.
Just a second, please, James. Can we just hold on 1 second there? I'm not sure that you... I think it should be Mark Stocks who should be talking to this item. So we're on audit findings, 1819, 1920 updates, and I'd suggested that we look at item 6 as well. So I think, Mark, it's probably more appropriate for you to talk now.
I can talk, Chair. In the pre-brief, we talked about officers talking first. I'm more than happy to go first if that's your request.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So in terms of the audits, I'll take them all in once, and I'll give members an update in terms of where we've got to and the progress that we've made. Councillor Turner's absolutely right. I agreed at the last meeting that we would produce a plan. As we progressed through the audit, it became clear that we weren't making the progress that we made. So actually giving you dates in terms of delivering was just, there was no purpose to it, because I couldn't actually guarantee delivering those dates. And so that's why the agenda says the 3 items in terms of the 1819 audit, the 1920 audit, and the value for money conclusion in terms of where we've got to. I won't talk about the reasons as to why it's not there, but I'm happy following any comments from James to come in and answer any questions. In terms of the 1819 audit, that's now substantially finished. I'd hope to get the audit findings report out to you this week. Clearly, I've not managed to do that. That should be finalised and with the council sometime the next week or the week after. The 1920 audit is still ongoing. There's still substantial amounts of information that we require from the council to be able to complete that audit. We continue to work with the council to make sure that we can finalise that part of the audit, but at the moment I can't guarantee a delivery date, although I would hope we'd be able to finish that in December. The value for money conclusion is really the same, I suppose, value for money conclusion whether you look at 1819 or 1920. We received the information from the council that we requested about a week or so ago. The forensics team have now been through that, and I received a verbal report today. They're going to give me a report or a final report on Friday, at which point I will take a view as to how I draw the value for money conclusion to a close. I'm not going to guarantee when I issue the value for money conclusion. So I think that's a complex issue with governance and in terms of the behaviours of officers and councillors. So I need to work through that in some detail before I finalise that. Again, I would hope to finalise that in December, but again, I'm unwilling to commit to a deadline given the information I now have in front of me. I have to take any questions, Chair, but James may want to respond.
Yeah, James, would you like to respond before we take questions from the committee?
Yes, certainly, Chair. So I think Mark's covered off quite a few things there. Just to know, I mean, if you split the audit between two parts, regardless of the year, it's a value for money audit and it's a statement of accounts audit. We largely thought we had the statement of accounts boxed off in terms of the audit queries from a few months ago, but I believe new inquiries have come forward. And so we're just working through those now, and Mark can outline the reasons why for that. The same for VFM, really, as Mark said, once we've got these final queries out of the way at the end of this week, that should hopefully cover off both financial years. This sort of delay may be in the 1920 statement of accounts, where Mark is right, we are working through the remaining queries. There's a lot of them. There's really two main reasons why this is taking us longer than we would have expected. One is because of the larger number of queries we've had this year, and again, Mark can explain that, but they are required to carry out the audit at the requirements of the FRC, and with that have come additional pressures really for them to increase the number of queries. And the second one is just at this time of year when we're trying to finalise the statement of accounts, we bring our finance team together normally in April and May to carry out all this work, and obviously a lot of the team now are working on things like the business grants relating to COVID, and also the budget setting and budget monitoring processes, which wouldn't have been as big a problem back in June and July, or April to July. So that's the two main reasons from our point of view why we're just trying to work through these this week and hopefully finalise all those queries.
Right, thanks, James. Members of the committee. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. The gentleman from the audit has said that they got the information that they required last week. That presumably has been requested for some time, because our last meeting was the 22nd of September. Has there been some delay by the council in furnishing you with the information that you required so that we can move forward with this? And also, could you tell me, are we up to date with when the accounts should be submitted to government? I've forgotten the date now, so if you could let me know what that is as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. As you can imagine, on something as serious as this, then there's a substantial amount of information that we required. I think there's something like 86 reports that have been provided to us. So it took the council time to provide that. I have no issue in terms of the time that it took. We did ask for a lot of information, but we have that now. I suppose you could term it as delays, but I don't think there was any intention. I think people have got it to us as early as they could do. In terms of the audit, the statutory deadline for the audit of the 18-19 accounts was 31st of July, so 2019. So obviously we're considerably beyond that timescale now. The deadline for the 1920 accounts is the 30th of November, and we won't meet that.
Thanks for that, Mark. Any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Turner, we waited to ask a question. Chris just asked me if you wanted to come in on this, because this obviously relates to the point that you raised earlier, but perhaps it's been addressed.
No, thank you, Chair. It's just that I'm getting an overall feeling that the delays for the audit is being pushed back on the council in the fact that there's been a dependency on the council to provide information to the auditors. Now, I've sat in these governance committee meetings from when I was elected back in May 19. I think we had a governance meeting shortly after that, and it's the first I've heard from the auditors that there's been a dependency on the council. Basically, the view that you're giving me is that the council's delayed giving you information. But now, there could be good. There may be good reasons for that, like you've indicated, is that there's this, there's been this plethora of information. But I'm just surprised that this is the first time I've heard that there were delays in information coming from the council to the auditors. What, I mean, we should have been told this ages ago, and part of the reason for this is that, again, we've not had a plan or subsequently the letter giving us the key deliverables, particularly for me for 18 and 19, where we could actually have the transparency of realising where your issues were. So, frankly, I'm disappointed that I'm finding out tonight that the council seem to be being made out as the reason for the delays in the audits.
Thanks, Councillor Turner. Mark, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you, Chair. So, so in terms of the 1920 accounts audit, obviously we commenced that after the last audit committee. So clearly there's a dependency on the council in terms of the provision of information. Every audit requires the council to provide information to us, and there have been significant delays in the provision of that information. So if you're sort of asking me, why that audit's delayed, it's because of the provision of information. So I think that's quite acceptable in terms of COVID. All councils are under pressure, and as the Director of Finance has articulated, there's other pressures on the finance team in terms of what they have to deliver. So, across the country, a significant number of accounts will be delayed because of the pressure on finance teams, and I think it's important that we do take that into account. In terms of value for money, you recall we discussed this at the last committee. We needed to wait for the conclusion of the council's own investigations and for the reviews of internal audit, and they were sort of concluded, I think, around July or August time. So we've picked that up as soon as we can, and we've requested information from the council that we have got now. So we've worked through that as quickly as we can, and we'll draw that to a conclusion. But there's no point in us taking that work on earlier while the council was concluding its own investigations. I take your point on the letter. I sort of reiterate my statement from earlier. Given the movement in terms of the audits and in terms of the deadlines, I didn't see any purpose in terms of giving you sort of I'm not quite sure how I would have done that, Councillor, but I will take that on board and have a think about the way that I could do that. So I apologise for that.
Thanks, Mark. I'm not sure if you're not muted, Councillor Turner. You might be now. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. The deadline, which is the 30th of November, that's news to me tonight. Who actually drew up that deadline? And you've indicated we're not going to meet it anyway. What are the ramifications for the council? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Councillor. So the deadline is set by MHCLG. So the statutory deadline for you public, it gets rather complex here. So there's no deadline for when I have to complete the audit. There is a deadline for when you have to complete, for when you have to publicly publish your accounts. So there's no breach from the council as long as it publishes its accounts by the 30th of November, and you put a note alongside that just explaining why the audit has been delayed. And as I said, you won't be the only ones to do that. So there are no ramifications. The reason that there's not a deadline for when I have to complete my audit is that it's not appropriate. So, you know, the driver for everything that we do is to deliver an audit that's of sufficient quality that you can place assurance on that work as members. So, you know, so having a deadline where I had to sign off whether I was satisfied or not is not the right thing to actually do. So I know you're disappointed in where we've got to. I can promise you that we've had a team on site ever since we last saw you, and the officers have done everything that they could to move this audit on as fast as they possibly can. The impact of COVID on finance teams is quite overwhelming across the country. And so if you can give us a little bit more time and be a little bit more patient, I'm sure we'll get there by Christmas. That is the aim. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mark. I can't see any other hands up from members of the committee. James, did you want to come in and add anything before we take any more final comments on these items that we've taken together?
Just to say that when Mark's outlined, we aim to have it completed before Christmas. We are hoping to set up a governance committee on the 15th of December to take the final accounts for their signature. Of course, that's the ambition at the moment. We hope to have, like I said, our queries sorted by the end of this week, and then it just depends on what further queries come back from audit. But we certainly aim to at least have the 18-19 accounts done by then and ready for sign off.
Thanks for that, James. Something to look forward to for Christmas. Any other comments or questions from the committee or anybody not on the committee? No? OK, we'll move on. Thanks for that. So we'll move on to item 7, Treasury Management Activity Mid-Year Review. And James, I believe you're going to present this item.
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, Tony had to attend to an urgent personal matter. OK, so this is a report to note. And the main part of the report is on agenda page 10, I think, as my computer just crashes. That's useful. So what it just outlines is our performance for the year so far. It's actually good news given the very low base rate from the Bank of England. At the moment, the council's earned 141k in interest, a return of about 0.59%, which isn't a lot, but it's a lot more than the, as we said, Link's recommended target of 0.1%. So we are doing well, and that's mainly because a lot of the investments were before COVID, and therefore we still earned higher interest rates. The average balance is, as noted on there, 47.4 million, which is very high. In March, I think we noted to governance last time, we took out £10 million of temporary borrowing because we weren't sure when the government funding was going to come through for things like the business grants, of which we paid over £20 million out to businesses over the past 4 or 5 months. So we had to just make sure we covered ourselves there. The money did come in, and we've since cleared that temporary borrowing, and we've enjoyed running down those cash balances as time's gone on. It should also noted that we did, it was noted in the last governance report about lending to North Lanarkshire Council, which breached our counterparty limits. That money did come back in, as we would expect, in July, so there was no further issues relating to that. Other than that, there is a very large document outlining all the various treasury management information, which feel free to ask me questions about, but I may have to refer those on to Tony as and when. Thank you.
Thanks for that, James. Any questions for James from the committee? No. Oh, is there a question? Right. Sorry, I'm stalling everybody because I can't see the screen from this distance. I'm struggling, so I'm relying on Carl. Councillor Brotherton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's just I'm just looking at the suggested investment durations on page 19. The list of institutions there are probably known to most of us, the names, but there's a couple that stand out. Al Rayyan Bank and Sumitomo Mitsubishi Banking Corporation Europe. Are they overseas banks, or how do we check the quality of these institutions? Thank you.
James?
So we will have advice from our Treasury management experts in terms of what we can invest in, and they will be obviously rated in terms of any risk, and that should be within, well, it will be within our Treasury management strategy. But I can certainly find out about those ones individually and report back to you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for that, James. Any other questions? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. My question relates to that particular Appendix C on 19, which is a suggested list from Link Assessment Services. Obviously, they do a risk rating, as been indicated. It might be useful for us as a governance committee to have those included when these suggestions come forward, because one only assumes that the relative risk of each is much the same. So it might be useful to have that appended to the report in future.
Okay.
James? Yep.
Yeah, I will speak to Tony about getting that added to the report.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions from members of the committee on this item? No, members not on the committee? No, excellent. It's just for noting, so we don't need to do anything else with that. Moving on to item number 8, the internal audit plan update, and Chris is going to present this item.
Thank you, Chair. This is a follow-on from the report that was presented at the last Governance Committee, where there were some justifiable criticisms of the audit plan that was presented. This is an up-to-date plan that's been prepared by the Internal Audit Service. It is for information only. It is pretty much 4 weeks out of date now, because it took us up to the end of October, 22nd of October. So additional work has been undertaken since the preparation of this document. Just speaking in advance of Councillor Clark's query in relation that he flagged up under the minutes item before, Councillor Clark, perhaps if I can give you a call tomorrow and I can specifically get the information that you want to see in relation to the prioritisation of high-risk audits, and then having spoken to you, I can then circulate a note to all members after that meeting. I do apologise I haven't done it already. The intention was to incorporate it within the audit plan, or at least give a risk rating to the audits listed here, and that doesn't appear to have been done, so I do apologise for that. But if I can speak to you tomorrow, I can then attend to the query and circulate it to all members. But as I say, the report is for noting.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. I was going to raise a question as far as that was concerned when you give me a call tomorrow. That's on the situation regarding the risk register and where we are on that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm quite happy to pick that up with you tomorrow.
Okay, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Councillor Clark. Any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. The list that is actually on page 35, the print is so tiny, it's almost unreadable. So the obvious answer I'm going to get is we'll go to ModGov, and therefore you can increase the size, which I did. Unfortunately, it won't let me go into ModGov to actually access these papers. It'll actually let me access the supplementary for the Constitution, but it won't let me access the governance papers. I've checked again tonight to make sure, and it won't even let me into ModGov tonight. So I don't know what on earth is going on. But could I suggest, please, if you are sending out some paperwork, could you please make it in a readable form, i.e. put it on an A3 as against an A4, because it really is unbelievably stupid to expect us to be able to read this, because I cannot. And as I say, I can't even get into ModGov to read it either. And there is just also a comment on the bottom of page 32. And it says that it is not to say this year should be abandoned by members or asked to consider that for a reasonable outline. This is a challenging year for internal audit. It makes me wonder if you have actually considered abandoning the audit to actually put a statement like that in some paperwork that's going out to the general public. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Chris.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Smith. To take your second query first about this comment, I think in part this is my view. There's never been an intention to abandon the internal audit function and to abandon the delivery of the internal audit programme. But I'm sure you can understand that during the summer months in particular, where due to the impacts of COVID and the lockdown, no audit work was undertaken. Shortly after the audit work commenced, there was a further lockdown announced, which again has impacted not only on the ability of the auditors to get in the office to work, but the teams to actually support, who are being audited to support the audit work. And in addition to that, there's been additional audit functions placed on the audit team in relation to assessing some of the additional functions that we've been asked to undertake as part of the COVID response works that the council have done. So the point with that is to say, look, we're working very hard. It would be very easy for us to say we've got a lot of things to do away from the audit plan, and that's not pursued for this year. But that was never the intention. OK, so that was the point that I was trying to make with that comment, that the audit plan will be delivered as far as we can. Turning to your point on ModGov, there are some national issues with ModGov, which I'm aware of. It has impacted on on a significant number of councils nationally. It is a ModGov issue. It is not a South Ribble issue, and it relates to a software update that has been undertaken by Apple, so we're told, by ModGov, and they're working on it to fix it. It is very frustrating. I wasn't aware that any members had been directly affected by this, because there is a fix that we could have advised members of. I had similar problems to yourselves yesterday, accessing all papers on ModGov, not just governance, and I've managed to get it sorted with IT. So if any members are having difficulties, we will get the message out to all members to contact the council and we can resolve them.
Thanks for that, Chris. That's reassuring on that front. Any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Sharples.
Thank you, Chair. I acknowledge and appreciate the hard work that you've all been doing regarding the internal audit and the difficulties with COVID and everything else. I seem to recall we mentioned last time that there was staffing issues, which obviously affects it. Where are we up to now with recruitment? And if there was another sort of major lockdown or extended lockdown, how would that affect things?
Chris. Thank you, Chair. Right, there are two posts currently advertised within the audit teams. There's a service lead post and a senior auditor post. Both of those adverts close on Friday. We're expecting a good return against the senior auditor post, and hopefully we'll have the interviews sometime next week, depending on availability, and then recruit to the senior auditor post after the appointment of the service lead, because obviously we want them involved in that recruitment. We currently have one vacant post, which is the service lead post in the internal audit service. We have a temporary senior auditor in place at the moment. As regards any of the impacts of a lockdown on recruitment, it will not prevent the recruitment proceeding. We have undertaken Teams interviews for other posts, and we can do so in relation to this one. And in relation to the impact on any further lockdown on delivery of the audit plan, yes, it will have an impact. It's hard to say what that impact will be, but yes, it's likely to cause some delays, because not not because the auditors will not be able to be present to do the work, but they may have some difficulties in getting responses from teams who are being audited, who may be prioritising COVID response work as a result.
Thanks for that, Chris. Any other questions on this item, committee or otherwise? No? Okay. There's no need for a vote on that. It's just for noting. So thank you, Chris. Moving on to item number 9, the Constitution review. And you've all had a supplementary agenda on this, and colleagues were involved in a task group looking at the Constitution. Gosh, I can't remember how long ago it was. Feels 2 weeks? 2 weeks. Feels like a long time ago. Chris, do you want to present this item? And obviously, there's a comprehensive amount of paperwork. I'm not expecting you to go through that page by page. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I won't go through the report because that is substantially the same report that was presented to the Governance Constitution Task Group. So you members will already be familiar with the contents of the report. Following the task group, it was made absolutely clear that members wanted to see proposed changes to the Constitution rather than just simply agree principles into how the changes can be implemented. So what I've done is I've put forward for you a series of proposed amendments to the Constitution. I've highlighted them, so members should have had the opportunity to read through these papers, and given the volume of them, paper copies were provided to facilitate this and to make it easier to do that reading. If I can refer to, rather than take you through individually, if I can just perhaps take through the papers en masse, and then if there are any issues or questions raised from members, then we can perhaps do it that way round rather than me take members through each and every change. The first appendix is substantially changes to the terms of reference for the committees. So it includes the introduction to the Constitution, and then it deals with the preamble documents you expect to see, and then the terms of reference documents. The content is not substantially changed. However, what I have done is reorder some of it, delete some of it, but actually what the Constitution says is not significantly different. So again, I'm quite happy to take any particular questions, but one point I would like to refer you to is at page 57, and this relates to executive member decision making, and this is one of the particular issues that I was asked to consider and address as part of this review, and that was to ensure that there could be executive member led decision making rather than officer led executive decision making. So you can see that there's specific wording that's been introduced at the top of page 57 that will help facilitate that. So Chair, perhaps if I can stop there and see if there are any questions on any of the proposals in Appendix 1.
You can, Chris. Any questions on that particular part? No? Okay, carry on, Chris. Councillor Smith, I do apologise.
It's just a query, Mr. Chairman. On page 68, which is under the Planning Committee and the membership of the Planning Committee. It's the third line down, and it says the Planning Committee has 5 members.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. That was just extracted from the Constitution as it currently stands, so I can make that amendment to say as a minimum of 5.
A minimum of 5.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Anything else in particular on this part? No? Great. Back to you, Chris.
Appendix 2, which starts on page 91, are the proposed changes to the Council's standing orders, Council procedure rules. I've highlighted where I've undertaken amendments to those. These are different to the previous appendix in that I haven't thinned these out or reordered anything. I've simply either deleted or added to them. So any changes here should be quite clear. The first changes that I perhaps would refer you to is at page 94. Which are the specific deletions relating to questions to be put to members. Now, if you remember, this was one of the principles that I suggested be incorporated, and there was some lengthy discussion at the task group about this particular provision in the standing orders as to whether it should be retained or not. I said I would put forward wording suggesting the change. And one of the things I did take on board was an observation that it should be retained certainly for the leader and deputy leader or deputy leader of the council. So the changes that I proposed there is to remove the additional provisions for questions to members of cabinet, chairman of committees, chairman of my neighbourhood areas, or any member of the council or joint appointed by the council to any joint authority or board, or a member appointed by or on behalf of the council as a member or director of any company, or any member champion. I've given reasons why I think that these can be deleted previously, and it's contained in the body of the report. So again, perhaps if I can take any questions or observations on that, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Any questions or comments on this bit? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can understand deleting some of them, but I still think we should have and retain the ability to question the cabinet members. It doesn't have to be detailed as we have had it in the past, but I still think there should be an ability for there to be the questions to the members of the portfolio holders, and I think this needs to be retained. My group do. We're very much in favour of retaining that, and I think we should think very seriously before we even consider taking that away. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Sharples.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I don't agree with Councillor Smith's view there. I think, for example, we recently discussed the community wealth building plan that we had, and that was discussed and questioned at scrutiny, I think, at scrutiny budget and panel performance, I think, as well. It's been discussed at cabinet. I don't really think that, you know, the cabinet holder needs to have those sorts of questions fired at them again at full council. If there was issues that relate to various things that you need to ask, for example, a cabinet member, you could do that in writing or send them an email. I don't think we need to discuss the same and ask the same questions at several meetings as well, and then ask them again at council. I really do think it doesn't make any sense to me at all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Sharples. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just say that I agree with everything that Councillor Smith has said. That's it.
Short and to the point, Councillor Turner. Appreciated. Councillor Clark.
Yes, I support that particular point of view. I think the cabinet members should remain on there. And why I'm saying this is because within the constitution, the change is proposed that the leader, the executive leader, will delegate responsibility for decision making to certain cabinet members. And also we're trying to make sure, or you're trying to make sure, that decisions which are taken, which are delegated, are down to the cabinet member. And therefore, whilst I appreciate that scrutiny could ask the questions, we're not all scrutiny members, and we're not going to bombard the scrutiny committee with all the members attending to do that particular thing. Otherwise, the scrutiny committee meetings will last forever. So I think that should remain. So it gives the opportunity to all members to ask a question about any delegated decisions which are taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Anybody else on this part of this? Oh, Councillor Smith wants to come back. Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it was noted at the Cabinet that it was referred to about, I think it was 3 times, that you should have been at the Scrutiny Committee because that's where a particular issue was discussed. I'm not necessarily concerned about that, but there are times when there are issues that come up that are not on the agenda of the Cabinet or the Scrutiny Committee that are of interest to the general public and interest to the Council, that a portfolio holder sometimes needs to be asked the question. And that's more the reason I'm saying this. I have a particular comment I heard this week about something that I would be particularly wanting to ask a question of one of the Cabinet members. And it has not been on an agenda in the last 4 or 5 months, but it's still a very important matter. So therefore, it's not always about what is on the committees that we need to put our questions to. So therefore, I would like to put forward that we do not exclude the Cabinet portfolio holders from questions at Council. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Anybody else, Coral, that I've missed? Okay. Well, I think we'll let Chris move on through the report and then we can look at the recommendations en bloc, or if we need to take them apart at the end, if that's okay. So, Chris, do you want to move on?
Thank you, Chair. Page 95, there's just a very brief amendment to council minutes and records of attendance. It's just a suggestion to streamline the acceptance of minutes rather than to have a formal vote on them that can be accepted by common assent. It's just to be clear, really, because I think the current way it's drafted actually requires there to be a full vote, which actually at the moment can be quite complicated with the hybrid meeting solutions. So again, I don't think it's a particularly controversial suggested amendment. Page 96, paragraph 13, again, this is perhaps we won't perhaps have the same discussion again. So I think I've heard you, or the meeting has heard the arguments about changing this provision in relation to the previous point. The paragraph page 97, paragraph 13.3. This is a consequential change if you choose to amend the questions without notice. So if you choose to amend who may be asked questions without by the council or council at cabinet. So the proposal is that questions without notice may be asked of the executive leader only. Now that obviously will fall away if you want to go back to asking questions of full cabinet. Page 98. Standing to speak, paragraph 14.3. It's just I've added an extra bit in just to say, but whilst they can stand, they should not speak until invited to by the mayor. That's just something that I've observed recently, because we've had people standing up and speaking immediately when they're trying to do a point of order or point of personal explanation. But I think it's important that, particularly with the hybrid meeting solutions where chairs are trying to manage screens and people in person and so on, that we maintain that people are members are invited to speak rather than just speak. I don't know if there's any discussion wanted on that point. Councillor Clark.
Well, that's Councillor Smith. Did you want to come in on this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a bit wary of this. I think somebody's got the microphone on. I'm echoing. I'm a bit wary of this at the moment. I do understand what you're saying about the hybrid meetings. I understand what you're saying about the Teams meetings, and it is difficult for people to try and manage. I understand what trying to see the little hands come up is also very difficult. Nevertheless, I do feel that it is a case of managing the meetings by the person who is actually chairing the meetings. And if they set the rules in the first place as to how they intend to take the meeting forward, making sure that everybody understands that they have to be put their hand up, make sure that they are ready to speak, and then mute themselves. I think that is a much better way than actually putting it into the Constitution. It's simply a matter of having somebody who can run the meeting properly in the first place, and making sure that people listen to what's being said and understand it and acknowledge the fact that people have got to respect the chair in the first place. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, I agree with what Chris is saying. At real meetings, that there are members, there have been members in the past who've stood up and shouted across the room, "Point of order, Mr. Mayor, point of order," which isn't, it's unseemly really, and I agree with that. But in this, we need to cover the hybrid meetings because we can't stand up. So there needs to be something in there that covers a virtual meeting as well as a real meeting.
Any other comments from members of the committee before I bring Chris back in on this point? No, Chris?
Thank you, Chair. I think you're right, Councillor Clark. I think it's difficult to do in relation to the hybrid meetings, which is why I'm suggesting that members are invited to speak, which is what the provision says by the Mayor, and it just makes it clear that that's the requirement on members, that while they can indicate a desire to speak, they must wait until they are invited to speak. I take the point, Councillor Smith, that it is about managing the meeting, and that is partially for the chair, but let's be clear, that's what the Constitution, the standing orders of the Constitution, is there to support the good management of the meeting and the decision-making processes. So whilst I accept what you're saying, to a point, the rules are actually set by the Constitution.
Thanks, Chris. Anything else on this particular point before we move on? No? Back to you, Chris.
Still on the same page, paragraph 14.5. This is around when a member may speak again. Now, again, I listened carefully to what the task group had to say about maintaining the Constitution and the rules of debate and the involvement of members at meetings. And actually, it got me thinking. So I extended the provisions for members to speak a little bit here because what I don't want to do as somebody responsible for the governance arrangements for the council is limit the ability of meetings to receive information. So the provision here is that where the mayor feels that the continued involvement of a member will assist the debate, the specific provision for the mayor to invite the member to come back in, even if they've already spoken and asked a supplemental. And I do think that that's quite important. Because it's not provided for within the Constitution at the moment, but it will enable members who perhaps have a particular expertise or interest in an area to participate more fully in a debate.
Any comments on that point? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I think we must welcome debate and hopefully people getting involved in the debate. And the idea that you've always got to ask a question. I know Chris hates people when they say, does the chairman agree or the mayor agree with me? So we've got to have a provision somewhere in there that if people want to make a point of explanation or a point to actually get the best information over so people can take an informed judgment, we've got to be a little bit flexible. So I would not like us to be tied too much by making it too formal. The other thing is, I hope at some point we are going to discuss the hybrid meetings that we've got at the moment and the ability for non-members of committees to discuss, to be able to speak. It's in the body of the original report, but I don't think it's actually anywhere within this constitution. So maybe at the end of the constitution debate, we can actually have a discussion about that, because I did ask Chris if he would put it on the agenda, because I do think it's important now that we do have a further discussion about the ability of non-members to speak at committees. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chris, I'll come back to you on that one.
Sorry, I'm a little bit confused. I think non-members of committee can speak in the hybrid meetings. They just have to give notice that they want to speak to an item. That's the only restriction at the moment. Now, I know that is a limitation, because we have had that discussion, that you feel perhaps inhibits the ability of members to be involved. But I think we just are where we are with it at the moment with the hybrid meetings.
Thanks, Chris. Any other comments on, and I'm not sure about taking another item after we finish with this one. Councillor Smith, you wanted to come back on this?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I'm getting myself confused now. My biggest concern with this is that when we originally debated this, which must be, I think, July time, maybe August, and we put these provisions in that people have to notify the committee if they wish to speak 2 days before. I think that is very much very restrictive, particularly on licensing and planning, because some things sometimes crop up during a time when you would expect to be able to just think about these things, and suddenly somebody comes to you with a particular query or question, and the deadline is gone. So I think when we actually put these provisions in, we expect to be out of lockdown by the end of the year. Well, as far as I can see, we look like we're going to be stuck with these hybrid meetings and Teams meetings for the foreseeable future, and I think probably into the middle of next year. And therefore, I think it may be a good idea to actually have a further thought about how we actually take this forward, because the last thing we want to do is restrict members' contribution to these very, very important meetings. And they are there to actually help their residents. And sometimes residents only turn up at the last minute wanting to actually ask a question. And I don't see how it is that difficult. It's only like members turning up to a planning meeting in the normal way of things. And as far as I can see, it doesn't seem to be a problem to actually connect you fairly quickly to a Teams meeting. So I can't see that's the problem. So I would very much like us to have another thought about the amount of time you've got to give before you're allowed to say that you can speak at these meetings, because I don't think it's very good for democracy if we're going to restrict people in this way. It's very much a thing that my group feel very strongly about, and I felt I needed to bring it to your attention, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Chris, do you want to just come back in on that?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Smith. Right, as far as I'm aware, we haven't had any licensing meetings since we've introduced the hybrid meeting. So I'm really confused as to why any member has had difficulties in speaking at licensing, because we just haven't had any meetings. As regards planning meetings, I'm not aware through planning meetings where any members complained that they've been unable to speak at a planning meeting where they wanted to do so. I know you flagged it up, and I did ask if you could let me have some details, and I don't remember seeing anything. I apologise if you have sent it through. I understand what you're saying about participation in the meetings, but we haven't had any complaints to suggest that there have been any issues as a result of the kind of restrictions that are currently in place.
Thanks for that, Chris. Anything else? And I know we've sort of gone off a bit of a tangent there, and perhaps this is something that we could look at, but not in this meeting, not now. But thanks for raising it anyway, Councillor Smith. Back to you, Chris. Let's move on through the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Page 100. Now, if we thought we had a conversation already, this is the section in relation to public participation. Members are aware, because we had the discussions at the task group, there are very broad public rights to speak at council meetings, including speaking to agenda items. I was proposing to restrict those rights to a degree, and members really were not happy, I think is fair to say, but wanted to see what those restrictions would look like in practice. So that is the drafting that you'll find at paragraph 15. Points 1, 2, 3 and 4.
Thanks, Chris. Comments, questions, observations on this part of the report? Councillor Bretherton.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I still think it's very important to allow members of the public to speak at the meetings at the time that they occur, rather than having to give written notice. Sometimes it might be that the members of the public feel that they only want to ask a question on the time of the meeting. For example, they might have listened to the debate, they might have listened to comments that have been made, and a question might occur to them. I think taking away the freedom of speech is not a good idea in this case. I think we should leave it as it is. And I did mention in the previous meeting that we had, I was a member of the public before I got elected. That's probably for a couple of years. I attended the council meetings, various committee meetings. I didn't have any intention to raise any questions when I went in, but having listened to the debates and listened to what was going on, a question came to my mind, and I'd put my hand up and asked it. And I think it's very important that we allow the public to continue to do that. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with what Councillor Bretherton's just said. I do think it's important that we still retain the right for the members of the public to actually come to meetings and ask questions. We should be encouraging members of the public to actually come and participate in our meetings. We've always been very proud of that at South Ribble. And all right, I understand the reasons for sometimes having a written question. Sometimes it is very helpful and you can get a fuller response. But there is nothing to take away that power of somebody coming to the council meeting that has got a passion for a question that they want to ask and the way they put it over. Sometimes just reading out somebody's question bluntly doesn't give that real power behind the comments that they want to make. And I don't think we should take that away from them. They are restricted to 5 minutes on any subject that they are going to bring up. So therefore, if we keep it to agenda items and it's 5 minutes, I don't see that it's particularly going to prolong any meeting of the council, and therefore I would be opposed to taking it away. And I would like to propose that we don't do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I've just noticed under responses and debate 15.3, Chris has crossed out address and left it as a question, except for further down he hasn't crossed it out. But I find that the public want to set a scene before they ask the question and give a background to members of why they're asking the question. So to cross that out, I think, is limiting their opportunity, because if this is implemented, the mayor, I know it's at the mayor's discretion as to whether they accept it, but it does limit their opportunity to present to the council the background to their question. So I think that should be left in.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I too used to attend the public gallery prior to being elected as a councillor. And I do believe there is value in members of the public being able to have live debate on something which they may trigger a requirement for them to say something in the actual meeting. I do agree with that. What I would say is what I have witnessed prior to being a councillor and being a councillor now is that we have a solution to stop. What I've also witnessed is individuals seeming to be able to debate, to comment on every single agenda item, which I think seems to move towards being obstructive. So I think there is a solution to this, and that is that we need to strictly adhere to the 5 minutes rule, which Councillor Smith mentioned, and it was exactly what I was going to say prior to what Councillor Smith said about the 5 minute rule. I've never seen any evidence. We have the clock ticking in the corner, so the facility is there, but I've never seen the chair, the mayor, basically, any mayor, strictly adhere to that, and that will be a solution to this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Turner. Any other comments? No? Chris, do you want to come back on this now or wait until later when we summarise, perhaps? OK, we'll come back later if you want to carry on now. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this is slightly less controversial. Just in relation to recorded votes, which is on page 101, paragraph 16.4. I'm just suggesting that we accept a request from a member that a vote be recorded, rather than have to have councillors standing up to support it. I went through the reasons at the task group, and I don't think there was any particular opposition to that proposed amendment. Yeah, paragraph 16.6, I would suggest that is deleted on the basis that if we are going to enable all votes to be recorded, then having an individual's vote recorded on a non-recorded vote is a bit of a nonsense. I think I don't really understand it, so the suggestion is just to delete it.
Thanks, Chris. I can't see any hands up, so I think we can move on.
OK. Page 102, the next proposed change is to previous decisions and motions. Yeah, this is just where there's been a motion to rescind a decision at a council in the last 6 months, it shouldn't be moved unless it's signed by at least 5 members. I also am suggesting that we also include what's the change, so that the request to have a decision revisited, what has changed since that decision has been made to mean that it's the wrong decision. I'm not precious about this particular proposal. If members aren't particularly keen on that, that's fine. The passage of 6 months might arguably be enough reason to revisit the decision. But I just think that it's important that rather than, and to be fair, I haven't witnessed it, but rather than have the ability to simply bring decisions back every 6 months just because we want to discuss it again, it doesn't really move the business of the council on. So I think if I can pause and take any questions at that one.
OK, thanks, Chris. Any comments on this? No. OK. Carry on, Chris, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a comment. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Paragraph 30 and 31, I just feel is repetition within the body of the document and can therefore be deleted. And these sections relate to declaration of interest and withdrawal from meetings of cabinet and committees and subcommittees. Well, the same rules apply both at council and at those committees. So I'm not entirely clear why we have a separate provision for declarations of interest at subcommittees. And similarly, the voting requirements the same at council and at the cabinet and subcommittees. So again, it's just a bit of repetition. It doesn't hurt for it to be in there because it is specific to those meetings, but it doesn't actually add anything to the constitution either. So similarly with the previous point, if it remains in, I won't lose any sleep over it, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be there.
Thanks, Chris. Again, I'm looking to see if there's any hands up on that, and I'm not seeing any, so continue.
The remaining points, there's one at paragraph, page 105, paragraph 33. This would only require amendment if members were seeking to change the public speaking rights. So I'll just move on from that one. Paragraph 34, however, bullet point 3. I would propose on planning committees that rather than leave it broad to borough councillors, it talks in terms of ward councillors who may speak at planning matters, and that is for a standards reason, that's for a code of conduct reason. My concern is that councillors who are not members of the committee should speak at planning in a representative capacity. Okay, so so therefore you should be speaking on behalf of the residents of your ward, and which is why I propose to limit it to ward councillors rather than borough councillors. Now you could include and widen that definition to say that it's ward councillors, councillors for the ward in which the application sits, or neighbouring wards who are affected by it, and that's to reflect the fact that there may be a planning application which is right on the border of two wards. But I think primarily it should be ward councillors speaking in a representative capacity, not councillors potentially from the other side of the borough, but happen to know one of the residents and are asked to speak on their behalf. Ward issues should be dealt with ward councillors. It is also a protective measure for members, because if a member who is not a ward member attends to speak in relation to a matter, it could cause issues in relation to standards complaints. Why are they turning up? Why are they supporting a particular individual? That it's to head off that scenario.
Okay, Chris. Any comments or questions on that point? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like Chris, please, if he would, to give me a bit of clarification on this. I'm thinking back to a meeting some weeks ago of the Planning Committee when there was the master plan for the lanes or Pickering's Farm or whatever you want to call it, was actually put before the Planning Committee. And there was a lot of people, a lot of members who are not on the Planning Committee and are not ward members for that particular ward, actually spoke on that particular issue on the basis that it was a master plan and it did affect quite a big area. Now, would that be restricted in that instance? Say, I'm just taking the lanes because this is the one that sticks in my mind. That is in Charnock Ward, I think. So would the representations that were made to the master plan just be from the members, the ward members from Charnock? Have I explained that right? I think I have.
Yeah,
I think you have, Councillor Smith. Yeah, Chris.
I think the starting point would always be it would be ward councillors or those in the immediate vicinity. However, there's always a discretion for the chair of the meeting to allow additional speakers, and if it was an application of significant importance to the borough, and now Pickering's Farm is actually included specifically within the Constitution as one of the matters of policy importance. So it's actually cited in the Constitution. I think that it would be well within the rights of the chair of planning to say, well, I'm quite happy to receive representations from members who are not ward members or not in the immediate neighbouring wards. It would have to be done on a case-by-case basis, but this goes back to your point, I think, Councillor Smith, about the chair, managing the meeting and making decisions, that depart from what perhaps are specifically within the Constitution to enable good decision making.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's covered at 34.2, isn't it? Yes. The discretion of the chair. Anybody else with any comments on this particular point? Councillor Clark.
Yes, I can see that point is covered, but I can recall in the past where, in fact, there has been a plan application for a particular ward, and the 2 ward councillors have not been able to attend. My concern is they appointed a proxy, which was me, and I spoke on their behalf. I don't want to find that is restricted by the planning committee chairman by saying, sorry, you're not a ward member, you can't speak. So I think we need to cover that to some extent, otherwise the residents aren't properly represented.
Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a fair point, Councillor Clark. I think you would hope, particularly in relation to planning, that the Chair would be very fair-minded in who they allow to speak. And it's a good point that if the ward councillors are unable to speak, then they should be entitled to ask somebody else. But I don't think it necessarily needs to go in the Constitution, because that should rarely happen. Where both or all ward councillors are conflicted out or unable to attend to speak. I could see a potential issue if the ward councillors live close together, perhaps, and they were directly impacted by a planning application, and there could be they could be prevented from speaking in that way. But it would, like you say, it would simply be a case of getting a colleague to speak on their behalf.
Thanks, Chris. Anything else on this point? No, not seeing any hands up on that one. Chris, have we got a little bit more to go?
Last bit, I'm sure you're all relieved to know, it's on page 106. I haven't actually done the wording for this, and I apologise for that, but that is because it's dependent on other decisions that you might make tonight. So if the executive member led decision making were approved, then we might want to consider having special proceedings to enable urgent decision making to take place. And this would be around special exemption procedures, which would enable us to waive the notice periods for confidential and/or key decisions. They are quite standard provisions. They are usually tied into the delegation to the chief executive or to the chair of scrutiny, who would be the gatekeepers, if you like, for those processes.
Thanks, Chris. Anything on that particular final point? No, not seeing any hands up there. So, Chris, I think it might be in order for a summary, perhaps, now of some of the key issues that have been raised by members of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Can I suggest that rather than take both appendices as a single item, can we take Appendix 1 first, and perhaps vote on that as a recommendation of the committee? Because I don't think there were any objections to the amendments in Appendix 1 at all.
That sounds reasonable, but I should have given the opportunity to members not on the committee to come in. And if Councillor Foster had twitched a bit harder, I might have seen him. But anyway, go for it, Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. I just would like to point out to all members of the committee that the Executive Cabinet and myself have had no input into this report that's in front of you. And we ourselves don't agree with some of the monitoring officers' comments. And I think it's important that I make that point to you all. And it's been interesting listening to the debate tonight, because it's the first time I've sat in and listened to a debate, because clearly I wasn't involved in any of the working groups either. And I feel very passionate about the Constitution, as we all do. And I also feel it's any changes that are ever made have to be to the benefit of the council. And so I just thought, Chair, it important that I made that point to the committee. I don't want the committee thinking that these are all Paul Foster's changes. They're nothing to do with me at all. Some of the monitoring officers' recommendations I agree with. Some of the monitoring officers' recommendations, as well, Chris knows, when I saw this report published, was when you guys got it for the agenda. I don't agree with, and so it's been interesting to listen to your deliberations, and how we're going to deal with this at council next week. I have no idea, because it could be a long night. But I do think if we are going to make changes to the Constitution, fundamental changes to the Constitution, we need to seek, wherever possible, unanimous consensus amongst all councillors, so that we agree that it's been done for the right reasons. So I think the recommendations that you're just all about to put forward now to council next week are important. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. I think you make a really good point there. We'd certainly want the recommendations to come forward from tonight's meeting to be strong, and for it not to last all night next week. So with that, I think Councillor Phil Smith would like to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Like Councillor Foster, I've been chomping at the bit for some while to try and get in, but no matter, I think most of the issues have been covered within the meeting. But I confirm that, being able to ask questions live at a council meeting is a really good way forward, and we at South Ribble set a fine example to most other councils where we allow that to happen. It is constitutionally good, and it's good for members of the public to be able to, if they can do, turn up to a meeting and give a response to that. Just with regard to the planning committee and the ward councillors, as we know, we have, as borough councillors, we have a responsibility for decisions across the borough. We have a special responsibility, if those are the right words, for our ward, which is really, really important. But there's many planning applications come to the council itself, to planning committee, that do affect cross-border. They don't just not close to there, but I mean, as a cabinet member for some while for regeneration, I spoke at many planning committee meetings on behalf of basically businesses and jobs and creation for the economy of the borough. So, there are decisions that are made at that planning committee that are really, really important, that members have a good and proper input into, where they can actually shape what goes on in the borough, not just within their ward themselves. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks for that. Any other comments from councillors not on the committee? Thanks very much. So, Chris, back to where we were, and you were proposing to take Appendix 1 separate to Appendix 2. So, did you want to say any more about that?
No, it's just quite gratifying to know, Chair, that I can upset members on both sides of the chamber when I'm putting forward a piece of work. Seamlessly,
no problem with that. So with that, we need a proposer and a seconder to move forward with Appendix 1. So I'll propose that we move forward in the way that's suggested and take Appendix 1.
I'll second that, Chair.
Seconded by Councillor Sharples. Do we need to go through and ask each councillor, or can I just say if anyone's against? Nobody's against. Excellent. Okay, second bit. This might be a bit slightly more challenging.
I think the easiest way to do it, Chair, is I did make a note where there seemed to be a general consensus against the proposed changes. So if I can just perhaps do a quick page turn again, and if I miss any where there's particular objection, then I can just make a note of it. But the change at page 94 would be amended so that it would include the cabinet members, so that there seemed to be an acceptance of deleting the committee chairs and below, but just leaving in leader, deputy leader and cabinet members. Okay. Sorry, and just to be clear, this is a change to the proposal that for approval. Okay, so yeah, I don't think there were any objections to the record of the minutes at page 95. Questions from members would on page 96. That amendment would be carried over, so that the members could questions could be put to members of cabinet as well as the leader and deputy leader. Those were accepted. I think the conclusion of the meeting was at page 98, paragraph 14.3, the standing to speak, was that not to speak until the mayor was invited. I know that there was a saying that the mayor, or the chair of the meeting should control the meeting, but I think this is part of their ability to control the meeting. I think that was broadly accepted. I'm just looking to see if there's anybody shaking their head. Okay, thank you. And then the provision at 14.5, I think that was accepted, which was the ability of the mayor to invite members back into the debate if they've already spoken. Page 100. I think I'm reading the reaction of the members in that they don't want to limit public participation, so there would be no proposed changes to this section as a result of this meeting. Yep. Okay. Paragraph 101. Sorry, page 101. The recorded vote changes at paragraph 16.4. I think were broadly accepted, as was the deletion in relation to the right to require an individual vote to be recorded. No one seems to suggest that they wanted to retain that, so I'd suggest deleting that. Right. The previous decisions and motions, again, no one spoke against the suggestion of including within a request to reconsider a question, a reason for the change, what has actually changed, why we're reconsidering it. And neither was there any opposition to the proposal to delete paragraphs 30 and 31, which were the repetition paragraphs, which made the specific to particular committees, which were already reproduced in relation to council meetings. So subject to those amendments to the documented changes, are we happy to accept Appendix 2?
So any final comments on that? I think Chris has covered the ground there and the debate and discussions. I think there might be one more though.
Sorry, I might. Yeah, sorry, I turned over 2 pages. Sorry, Chair. I could do with a bit of clarity from members now about this point about participation at planning committee, whether members wish to leave it as borough councillors or wish to limit it to ward councillors plus wards immediately affected by the application. I hear what Councillor Phil Smith said in relation to his, the role of the executive potentially in relation to these matters. I still think there is a discretion within that provision that the chair can depart from it. I just think it's a useful guidance for members to assist them as much as anything.
Thanks, Chris. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A little bit like Phil mentioned, I have often spoken. Obviously, somebody's got the microphone on. That's better, thank you. I've often been to planning meetings and spoken, particularly when we were talking about things like City Deal, which often came up in planning, were not particularly in my ward, but I felt that it was important to have input into it, to give people the background and information. I'd be a little bit concerned about just sometimes restricting it to ward members. I think we can just be a little bit more flexible on that and make sure that we are encompassing everybody who would like to have a participation in them. It's always a very emotive committee is planning, and people do get quite upset if they feel that their point isn't being put over or they're not getting enough airtime, if you will. But as long as the chair has got the ability to control it, I think we should be okay by just leaving it as borough councillors myself. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Councillor Turner.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just again, my thoughts on the planning committee, and I feel that in terms of members speaking, it should be restricted to members where it has an impact on the ward. I think that covers off ward members themselves if the planning application's in their ward, and there's some fluidity there for people where it does have a greater impact on their wards as well, which may not necessarily be where the planning application is. I suppose I'm really balanced really between I think maybe there are opportunities, or there are circumstances where it may affect not just the members of the ward but other members as well, and I think they should be allowed to speak in that case. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Turner. Chris, just respond to this. I know Councillor Bretherton's waiting, but Chris first, please.
Thanks, Chair. I take the point that Councillor Margaret Smith's made there about area applications of perhaps borough importance or regional importance even, and it can perhaps soften the provisions to enable borough councillors or non-ward councillors to speak more clearly where it's clearly a large significant application that has wider implications, and that perhaps is a better way to do it, so that gives you the comfort as members that if it is an application that has more significant implications for the borough as a whole or large parts of the borough, that members can speak to it.
Okay, that's helpful. Councillor Bretherton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just feel that if we just leave it as borough councillors, it gives the opportunity for anybody that is passionate about any particular issue to be able to speak at the meeting rather than restrict it. I can't see any reason why a councillor that's representing the ward, but also, it's got the heart of the wider council in mind, to restrict them from speaking when they could maybe add some valid points. I just think it would be better to keep it as it is. And I can't think of a situation where people are going to say something that they shouldn't be saying. And the chairman's, or the mayor, the chairman's has got a right to impose the rules anyway, and stop them speaking if they shouldn't be. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Bretherton. I'm just chatting with Chris on this. Chris, do you want to come back and explain what we've just been discussing?
There's not agreement within the committee tonight as to the correct approach here. So what perhaps I could do is, well, I will do if committee agree, is to do two alternate definitions here. One for ward councillors with the extension to include wider borough import, and one just leaving it be and perhaps leaving the question open to full council to make the actual decision on. I think it's a finely balanced decision, and I fully understand why both members from both sides are making the points they're making. I think what I would say, just in response, sorry, Councillor Bretherton, I do need to come back on that. It does worry me a little bit where you're talking in terms of passion in relation to representations rather than planning merits. Because that's what the planning committee are there to assess. And whilst I'm not stupid enough to know that a passionate delivery won't influence a decision, I think we have to be very careful about saying that the ability for members is to go and speak on something of which they are passionate rather than speaking to the planning merits of it. Sorry, a standards issue. Sorry.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. Councillor Smith will take final comments on this before I move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just a point I'd like to bring up is about B2, which is protected land. in our village we have 2 areas of protected land. There was a situation about 12 months ago where there's only 3 other places that have got protected land. There's one in Samlesbury and one in Higher Walton. The one in Higher Walton came up for discussion as to whether it should be built on. That would have had a direct influence on the land at Samlesbury and the land at New Longton, because they were both protected land. And so the feeling was that it was important to make sure that the feelings of the other areas that have protected land could express an opinion as to why they felt it shouldn't go forward in a particular way. So sometimes there are areas like that that have a particular impact on different parts of the borough, and yet you're not the ward councillor for that particular area and would possibly be not allowed to speak, if you understand what I'm trying to get at. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Mrs Smith. Right, Chris, we've got your amended proposals.
Yeah.
And is there anything else that you want to cover before we move forward with that? So, no, I don't. So let's take the proposed amendments to Appendix 2, and we'll include in that the alternative options that you're proposing or suggesting that are taken to full council next week. Is that okay, committee, if we can do it that way? Yeah, I'm not seeing people shaking their heads, so I'll propose the amended Appendix 2. Do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Sharples. Do we need to take a name vote, or we'll just do it the same as we did before? Any opposite? Anybody against moving forward in this way? Councillor Smith, is this a comment, or are you voting against moving forward in that way?
No, I'm not voting against. I just want to be clear what we're actually proposing for this planning. I'm clear that we're not going to go down the route of not allowing us to ask questions to the portfolio holders. Same with we're going to include the members of the public are still going to be allowed to speak, but I'm not clear exactly what we're proposing with this planning. If Chris could just enlighten me, and then I'd be happy to then proceed. Thank you.
Okay, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal is that it will either be as existing, so the existing wording which enables borough councillors to speak, or it will be as drafted by myself, which will be the proposal which would be limited to ward councillors, subject to those amendments we discussed, which would be neighbouring ward councillors who are affected by the application, or applications of borough importance. I did find the reference, sorry Chair, I did find the reference to where Pickering's Farm actually is. It's actually on the same page, 105. So the council have identified a number of sites of borough importance already. C1 is Pickering's Farm, C2 Moss Side Test Track, C3 is land between Heatherley and Moss Lane, and C4 is the Cuerden strategic site. So, you know, there are already these rules are disapplied for those sites already. But that's the proposal. So it would be as is or ward councillors, and it would be for full council to make the decision.
Is that okay, Councillor Smith? Does that cover the options? And it's because we've got a difference of opinion within the committee that we've arrived at this. Did you want to come back?
Well, I think just to come back, I think it's unfortunate that we've got a difference of opinion on here, because it would be good if we could actually go to council within decisions made by this committee that we're all in agreement with. My feeling is that we should leave that particular area as regards the planning as borough councillors, because I think there's enough discretion within the chairman's jurisdiction to actually make sure that if it's not appropriate, he can control the meeting and make sure that it all runs smoothly. So I would be prepared to leave it as it is. I'm happy with the other two, but I would like the Borough Council, the planning to stay for Borough Councillors, is my thought. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Smith. We are where we are with this, so we're with the proposals as they stand, as amended on Appendix 2. So once again, I'll ask if anybody wants to vote against the amended proposals. No? Okay, excellent. So we'll move forward with that, and our recommendations will go to full council next week. Is it next week? Thanks very much for all your input on this, for those of you that took part in the task group and in tonight's meeting as well. Thanks very much. And well, we'll see you all next week. Thank you. Thanks a lot.